Hello, friends. Welcome to another Gord's Poetry Show. And this is a retake. The previous first version was halted when the machine that is recording me decided to shut down and start up again, and I have no idea why. So, Gord's Poetry Show. And I think we're going to call it, what did I call it before? Spring's almost here, that's right. And I'll try not to get disgruntled as I was, 25 minutes into the show before. It's quite a shock. And, in fact, I was right in the middle of a rupi kaur poem and just about to get to the last line and it was gone. Perhaps some of you techies can explain to me what happened. This is the non-techie Gord talking here. Now, I had begun, and I will re-begin with some more of Liu Chi's Wen Fu, The Art of Writing, as translated by Sam Hamill. In the introduction, there's some interesting historical references that I think you'll find a little chilling. In our own time, it is all but impossible to imagine actually putting one's life in jeopardy over a poem or essay, but to the classical Chinese poet it was a daily reality, unless one was willing to play cozy with the ruling class. But even then, a revolution could spring up at almost any moment, and last year's prize winner could very well be this year's ritual sacrifice or exile. There are few major classical Chinese poets who did not experience exile at one time or another. A revolution can spring up at almost any moment. Boy, well, that sounds contemporary, at least in some parts of the world. Such conditions have been an essential element in the history of poetry in the West as well. Socrates provides our archetype. Dante wrote his comedy under a death sentence. As I write, I think of Czesław Miłosz and Han Jin, and dozens of other poets from around the world who have sought refugee status in the United States. Liu Chi wrote his treatise for them, and for all those who dare to engage poetry, the art of letters, at its deepest levels. In his seriousness there is great joy. In his instruction there is not only a noble investigation of writing practice, but lessons in living as well. Thank you, Sam Hamill, for that. Choosing words. This is number 3. We've already read 1 and 2. Ordering thoughts and ideas, we begin to choose our words. Each choice is made with care, fit with a sense of proportion. Shadowy thoughts are brought into the light of reason. Echoes are traced to their sources. It is like following a branch to find a trampling leaf, like following a stream to find the spring. A poet brings light into great darkness, even if that means the simple must become difficult or the difficult easy. Hence the tiger may silence other beasts, the dragon frighten away birds in terrifying waves. Writing, the traveling is sometimes level and easy, sometimes rocky and steep. Calm the heart's dark waters, collect from deep thoughts the proper names for things. Heaven and earth are trapped in visible form. All things emerge from writing within the brush of writing. At first the brush parches our lips, but soon it grows moist from dipping. Truth is the tree trunk. Style makes beautiful foliage. Emotion and reason are not two. Every shift in feeling must be read. Finding true joy, find laughter. In sorrow, identify each sigh. Sometimes the words come freely. Sometimes we sit in silence, gnawing on a brush. 4. The satisfaction. The pleasure a writer knows is the pleasure of sages. Out of non-being, being is born. Out of silence, a writer produces a song. In 1 yard of silk, there is infinite space. Language is a deluge from one small corner of the heart. The net of images is cast wider and wider. Thought searches more and more deeply. The writer offers the fragrance of fresh flowers, an abundance of sprouting buds. Bright winds lift each metaphor. Clouds lift from a forest of writing brushes. Um, 3rd century AD, and let's stay deeply backwards in time with Anne Carson, that recipient of the MacArthur Genius Award. I'm sure she's terribly embarrassed about it. And her translation of Euripides' play Bacchae, a fairly nifty cover. And what I like about this is her introduction, or translator's note. Obviously, it's a play. I'm not going to read a play, but the introduction is written in the form of a poem. And it's called, I Wish I Were 2 Dogs, Then I Could Play with Me. Dionysius is God of the beginning before the beginning. What makes beginnings special? Think of your first sip of wine from a really good bottle. Opening page of a crime novel, start of an idea, tingle of falling in love. Beginnings have their own energy, ethics, tonality, color. Greenish, bluish, purple, dewy and cool, almost transparent as a ripe grape. Tone of alterity, things just about to change, already looking different. Energy headlong and heedless, and shot like a beam. Ethics fantastically selfish. He is a young god, mythologically obscure, always just arriving at some new place to disrupt the status quo, wearing the start of a smile. The Greeks call him foreign, and staged his incursion into polis after polis in stories like the one in Euripides' Bacchae, a shocking play. Lecturing in Japan, Stephen Hawking was asked not to mention that the universe had a beginning and so likely an end, because it would affect the stock market. Speculation aside, we all need a prehistory. According to Freud, we do nothing but repeat it. Beginnings are special because most of them are fake. The new person you become with that first sip of wine was already there. Look at Pentheus twirling about in a dress. So pleased with his girl guys, he's almost in tears. Are we to believe this desire is new? Why was he keeping that dress in the back of his closet anyhow? Costume is flesh. Look at Dionysius, plucked prematurely from his doomed mother's womb and sewn up in the thigh of Zeus to be born again later. Yikes, sewn up in the sun. Life is a rehearsal for life. Here's a well-known secret about Dionysius. Despite all those legends of him as a new god, imported to Greece from the east, his name is already on linear B tablets that date to 12th century BC. Previousness is something a god can manage fairly well. Time is a fiction for him, but mortals less so. Look at those poor passionate women who worship this god, the Bacchae, destroyers of livestock and local people in Pentheus the king. They had a prior existence once. The herdsman describes them, lying at peace in the mountains, calm as buttons on a shirt. This is the world before men. Then the posse arrives and violence begins. What does this tell us? The shock of the new will prepare its own unveiling in old and brutal ways? Dionysius does not explain or regret anything. He is pleased if he can cause you to perform. despite your plan, despite your politics, despite your neuroses, despite even your Dionysian theories of self. Something quite previous. The desire before the desire, the lick of beginning to know you don't know. If life is a stage, that is the show. Exit Dionysius. Yes, very nice. Not always the greatest understander of Anne Carson's work, but I certainly enjoy that. Susannah Showler, Thing Is. Enjoyed that last poetry show, and I'm still enjoying it. And I'd just like to add that she is currently the 2018 Presidential Fellow at The Ohio State University. And more praise to any poets that can do anything like that, because most of us toil in utter obscurity. But toil probably isn't really the word. It's more wrestling with language and realizing time and time again that language always wins. Self-portrait with iPhone. Touch a picture of a wastebasket for forgetfulness. A gear when you want to change your fate. This isn't mechanical, but if the tooth fits, there's the bite. I can drag boxes from the center, swipe to bring on a quick cascade of the new. Each moment arrives like a group hug, a float in a parade. My best dick pic is a panorama, frames feathered across the screen. Nothing to see, no thing to see here. Predictive text. Left a note to myself on the counter. Bald side up, it drinks all the light. Fear is, to turn it over would foretell my standing here, not turning it over. The record of last night's me knowing I'd be here, stuck with one foot in the nearest verb, tense, like a pervert enjoying a soaker. What follows from what you know is not the same thing as knowledge, even when you get it right. Good comeback. I'm not doing anything new, just pointing to what you already knew was there. You've noticed how the same words keep coming up? It's like that one recurring hair on my chest. I've set my phone to tell me when to pluck it out. That the memory of my own intention could be kept in my pocket by a fragment of light is one reason I don't wish myself into the past anymore. Which doesn't mean I've stopped playing the game of reaching back, feeling for events with some give, seeing how much torsion memory can take before the present reveals itself to be one line item on an agenda of outcomes up for discussion. I see how this could become unsettling, to know yourself as unnecessary, but new contingencies keep meeting me where I am, like a treadmill's false asphalt, telling me temporary can feel grounded. That hair comes through my chest's exact middle, like it's a message from my core, which is one part of myself I put some work into. One of these days the hair will open its tiny face and speak. Save as new. Yes, thank you, Susannah. Great fun. And challenging to read too. Phoebe Wang, Admission Requirements. We read it before, just the last show. And I'd like to read some more. It's her first trade book, and I'm mighty impressed with it. Night Ferry. As if fleeing disaster, we sprinted up the salt-sloshed gangplank minutes before they turned away fares for the last ferry out. My mother, my sister, and I spill hard on the varnished seats, victims of laughter. Like the deck of a Ouija board, the boat crawls toward the outlying islands, keeping intentions hidden. Lama, Lantau, Chung Chao, and Peng Chao, numerous as the multitudes of cousins we were estranged from, but still ferried to. The city is burning its birthday candles, pink and yellow neon brand names scrawling their best wishes on Victoria's harbour. Across in Sham Shui Po, the tenements don't fixate on unprofitable passages they'll never make. Up ahead, a manacle of light chains the temple peaks to their fate, not visible a half a world away, where our blue beds wait for us, in the government town that keeps its canals locked and quartered. Summer, and instead of piano lessons and pasta, we nibble coconut buns and listen as Mum chatters about squeezing blowfish with her brothers and collecting milk bread from the docks to the family corner store, where customers scolded her for reading Time magazine instead of becoming someone's tai-tai, someone's daughter-in-law. She's still bitter. The ferries puttered off without her. But tonight the tide snarled on our outstretched fingers. We'll take it to bed with us and wake with the smell of dried prawns and incense powdering the small of our backs. At the other end we let old ladies disembark first, carts of onions and salt eggs jostling down the ramp, then up the tapering streets. The dark escorts us and is our gauntlet. Every night we surrender to those who've never left or thought to leave. The prospect sinking unferried into the buoyant sea. Every morning a narrow escape. The Stone Garden. Now there are only these chipped pills I can't swallow. I used to have something to tend, some quick flame I was convinced was color fast, but faltered after the flash of infatuation. Well, that season's gone like a sound mind. I've been bequeathed these forged organs, these oracle bones already thrown in my favor. If this is my home now, I must hammer out their rhythm, but not yet. Because the first snow is shushing the world, the gravel is repeating my footsteps, and the courtyard is laying out its game board. It's my move. I analyze my position from every angle, as though every hour is a trial. If only they weren't blocking my view. They are the view. I crave instruction from those dumb tongues on how to keep mum as monks, to budget eternity, to grind light with wisdom teeth. As if mass and compression were lessons I could learn by heart. As if virtues could be modeled around their shapes, are shapes of other things I can't resolve. The stalemate of the day, the long con of the night. I was looking for, there's a couple of poems that are still life, and I had found them, read them before, and then have lost the paper pages. Still life with fallen fruit, after Mary Pratt's Jelly Shelf. Mary Pratt, Canadian artist that I'm very fond of myself. The kind of light that gives itself away by the handfuls, by armloads, for free, if only we could keep it in stock. She had no plans, her inspiration last minute. A picnic, a drive to the unresolved perimeter of the city, but in sight of the familiar. The river, knocking at its receptacle. Let's go, she said, sending us scrambling for whatever we needed. Dad on the hunt for binoculars, camera batteries, my sister and I for diversions. But she always had what she needed to take us beyond the parking lot asphalt, the cat-sized chain link, ringing scenic lookouts, and the valley's assembled views. We drank our fill of iced tea and years later unsealed scraps. A buttercup or four-leafed clover pressed flat inside a sun-toasted paperback. Each twirling far afield on maverick Samara until her call gathered us like returning boomerangs when she spotted some roadside crop, sour fruits of a government-tailored beautification project, wild grapes, rose hips, and with uncontained glee she stuffed every bag, box, and hastily wiped takeout container, while the rest of us indulged her, finding reluctant pleasure in reaching for a heavy, ripened load paid for by a thorn scratch and bite. Still, I couldn't help looking over my shoulder for the permission we didn't require, for the eyes that pierced our backsides with questions never voiced. Is any of this yours? To take? Rinsed, picked over, boiled down, and sealed tight with barely a taste. The fruits of our labor were more than what we'd come for, and nothing gone to waste. Still life with dream interpretation. What if you never rose above the broad strokes framing your life, but instead stuck fast to the pitch of your father's fury that you and not your brothers succeeded to his talents? It nearly happened. The fine grind of gossip, the assembly line work clinging to your fingers like pine soot, the night school English and the gaps it didn't fill. No one gets it right on the first try. With practice, you'll be weightless as an orphan, your own portable island. Did you wrestle free of that dream of flight, or has flight shaken free of you? Thank you, Phoebe. Thank you, water. Rupi Kaur, The Sun and Her Flowers. Rupi is a famous Instagram poet, and I do mean that, touring the world, reading her poetry. And I found one here that I'm quite fond of. It's a bit of a cri de coeur, and how can I say? No commas, no full stops. And points that I disagree with, but we'll get to that. I'd like to recognize the fact that some of these Instagram poets are reaching beyond their cries of grief and embraces of romance to sort of grappling for a poetic tradition they seem to know very little about, and something that they will have to embrace if they wish to continue as poets. Continue onward into middle age and maturity is what I'm talking about. You start as a poet exulting in expressing yourself. All poets do. And then eventually you realize that if you continue, you have to contribute to the tradition. Else your work just sort of disappears. Might take a few years, but it'll still disappear. And maybe there's nothing wrong with that disappearing act. When you're young, it doesn't seem important. But later it does. And obviously I'm no longer young. But in my youth, we had poets that expressed themselves very simply. Rod McEwen was one. To some degree, Richard Brautigan was one, although he managed to leap into the tradition of metaphor and how shall I say, culture. Anyway, I wish Rupi well, and I hope she writes more poems like this one. Broken English. I think about the way my father pulled the family out of poverty without knowing what a vowel was, and my mother raised 4 children without being able to construct a perfect sentence in English. A discombobulated couple who landed in the New World with hopes that left the bitter taste of rejection in their mouths. No family, no friends, just man and wife. 2 university degrees that meant nothing. 1 mother tongue that was broken now. One swollen belly with a baby inside. A father worrying about jobs and rent, because no matter what this baby was coming, and they thought to themselves for a split second, was it worth it to put all of our money into the dream of a country that is swallowing us whole? Papa looks at his woman's eyes and sees loneliness living where the iris was, wants to give her a home in a country that looks at her with the word visitor wrapped around its tongue on their wedding day. She left an entire village to be his wife, and now she left an entire country to be a warrior. And when the winter came, they had nothing but the heat of their own bodies to keep the coldness out. Like 2 brackets, they faced one another to hold the dearest parts of them, their children, close. They turned a suitcase full of clothes into a life and regular paychecks to make sure the children of immigrants wouldn't hate them for being the children of immigrants. They worked too hard, you can tell by their hands. Their eyes are begging for sleep, but our mouths were begging to be fed, and that is the most artistic thing I have ever seen. It is poetry to these ears. They have never heard what passion sounds like, and my mouth is full of likes and ums when I look at their masterpiece, because there are no words in the English language that can articulate that kind of beauty. I can't compact their existence into 26 letters and call it a description. I tried once, but the adjectives needed to describe them don't even exist. So instead, I ended up with pages and pages full of words followed by commas. And more words and more commas, only to realize there are some things in the world so infinite they could never use a full stop. So how dare you mock your mother when she opens her mouth and broken English spills out? Don't be ashamed of the fact that she split through countries to be here, so you wouldn't have to cross a shoreline. Her accent is thick like honey. Hold it with your life. It is the only thing she has left of home. Don't you stomp on that richness. Instead, hang it up on the walls of museums next to Dali and Van Gogh. Her life is brilliant and tragic. Kiss the side of her tender cheek. She already knows what it feels like to have an entire nation laugh when she speaks. She is more than our punctuation and language. We might be able to paint pictures and write stories, but she made an entire world for herself. How is that for art? Thank you, Rupi. That was passion. There are adjectives that you can discover. Just read some more. That's another thing to discover as a young poet. It's actually more about reading than writing. By reading, you discover what's already been written and discover the tiny patch that is left for you to fill in. And boy, is it tiny. Laurence Hutchman, Canadian poet, has discovered that. An example in his latest book, Personal Encounters, which we read from before, but here's a couple of ones that fill in that little gap. The last visit to my father. Would you recognize me? It has been months since I've seen you. You don't look directly at me when I ask you. Who am I? You look distracted, reach into your thoughts, but can't come up with an answer. I haven't a clue. Herman? I show you my book. When did you write that? A flicker of recognition in your eyes. Then your attention leaves. My sister Ellie tries to prod your memory with big band era songs and family photos, but you seem locked in your private space, uttering phrases that are hard to hear, that only have significance to you. In the sunset room, you look at the old home movies of the Five Brothers reunion in Donegal. Your attention is drawn to scenes you have filmed. The grey house, the haggard cliffs, the long brown beaches. These are distantly familiar to you in a life that was once your Ireland. You try to put it into some whole, piece by fractured piece, but your words are lost in the crash of the surf and the jangled currents of your memory. Just before our imminent departure, and perhaps sensing our leaving, you suddenly turn to me for the first time in the afternoon, look deeply into my eyes and say, "Is that you, Laurence?" The line, "I haven't a clue, Herman," is followed by a poem called Herman. That first sunny morning in Catwick, we climbed the white-ribbed sand of the dunes and waving grass, and the water sparkled blue and gold. When I was 7, I crossed the hallway to your bedroom. You sat by the window painting. It took you weeks to shape your Canadian mountains, stroke by stroke. Pine by pine you formed the forest, the grey-purple glaciers, a white peak shining in the windy sky. Smoking in your room, you described the war, how you dragged firewood through heavy snow, avoiding the patrol. Outside The Hague, you gave an orange to a starving old man. We drove to Jasper in the mountains, sailed across the blue crystal lake on a wooden raft like Jim and Huckleberry Finn. Later, heading east, you drove the prairies in a day, down the lakehead past Nipigon. We laughed and told legends of the Aboriginals. The moon was a red volcano. We skied down the mountainside over high-banked edges and the curving moguls, down through slopes of that white and silver sea, down through the silence into evenings around our stove and coffee. I see you now no other way than in motion, sailing across Georgian Bay, skating down the Humber River, skiing down the mountainside, talking around the campfire. You refused me nothing, Herman. Uncle, brother, painter, clown, hero, as generous as the colors and forms of the earth. Well, that's quite a tribute, Laurence. Herman must have been something to know. There are many poems in this book, personal encounters for his partner Eva. Here's one. We find each other before the waterfall. The place is so peaceful. The 2 trees are reflected in the pond. I can see them clearly. I say, "Show yourself to me." "I will show you myself," you say. You look into my eyes, and you do show me yourself. Your eyes are green pools. I see myself in your eyes. There is a movement, the slow movement of horses. Your eyes have a naked beauty. I'm alive to all around me. The pond becomes your painting. I see the concealed blues, the far reds, the edge of ferns. I hear the voice of the waterfall as your inner voice. In the center of the pond, the pagoda is our temple. You and I reflected in the water are those 2 trees. Tonight, also for Eva. Tonight I talk about sadness like a dark mist, but you raise your eyes to mine and moonlight shines. Tonight as we lie naked to each other, I sing to you and you listen. I touch you and am touched by you, and I feel life grows larger. Life doesn't leap, it does indeed grow larger. Not smaller, as some say. Larger, larger. We embrace more as we grow. I'm sure Bruce Cockburn's got a really good line about this, but I can't quite remember what it is. Something about larger and larger like boats in tow, but maybe I'll search it out for next time. It's about time we read some Bruce Cockburn on Poetry Show. It really is. Canada's troubadour. I've always felt he was, and still is. It's not a was, it's an is. And that is life and Poetry Show. It's an is, it's not a was. So long, friends.